wire fraud, bank fraud. I'll be honest, I don't really give a shit. In most cases, like you defrauded Medicare. I don't, okay. I feel like Medicare is defrauding me. However, I think it's important to note that a lot of fraud cases have extremely real victims.
Welcome back and happy Tuesday, turkeys. How long have we known each other?
We've known each other for 2 decades.
I am not apologizing for who I am or what I like or the people that I love.
How do I be a wife? How do I be a mom? And how do I be myself and all of that? You didn't see that coming, did you?
Morning.
Happy Tuesday.
Happy Tuesday in 2026.
That's crazy.
Okay. Let me set the scene.
Wow.
Let me set the scene for the viewers and the listeners and for you, to be quite frank. I was listening to a podcast the other day and they were talking about the criminal justice system in America. And then they were looking up stats, some of which I will share with you this morning. And everything that they were saying made sense in the context of understanding that they had. But I was silently trying to scream into the phone because there's a lot of things that sound good or make sense at a surface level, but there's actually a lot more nuance to it, especially when we're talking about federal crime, which is what they were specifically talking about. So I am using you as a layman to stand in as we talk about this and gauge your general reactions, because I could not interject myself into a podcast and do not have the public clout to reach out to these people directly.
Interesting.
To provide clarification. I needed to vent this somewhere. So I seriously, afterwards sat down and wrote my dissertation. And then I figured we could talk about it today.
Oh my gosh. Okay. I'm curious, where this is going. Will I have a different opinion or is it just
I don't think you will. I just think we'll just get into this and you'll see. Because what will happen is it will sound at face value like, oh, that's a bad thing. But then when you dive further, it falls apart.
Okay. I'm here for
because what they were doing was having a genuine conversation, but they were doing it from the lens of somebody that I don't think really fully understands, especially the federal criminal justice system in the United States, which explains some of the statistics. Here we go. Starting off, I think we can all agree that we have way too many people incarcerated in our country.
Yeah.
Too many, too often, too much, over prosecution. I have some rants I could go down. We'll keep it contained. I think we can also all agree that private prisons are disgusting.
Yes.
So they're privately owned company. No, you're fine. So privately owned company, for people who don't know, they basically profit off of incarceration, which I find insane.
Which just leads to corruption. Okay, sorry. More corruption than normal.
Please add. But some of the things that I know have been a problem with them are, horrible staffing ratios. I'm sure that people are not being fed well. I'm sure they're not being fed well across the board. But also, what incentive is there to provide programming to reduce recidivism? None, because you only make money if they come back.
It's like healthcare. Okay.
Exactly. And then also, I don't understand why it was ever even allowed. Oh, there's an albino squirrel in my tree.
What?
Yeah. I'm not going to be able to show you guys, but.
Is it white?
Oh, yeah, it's fully white and it has red eyes.
My God, that's terrifying.
I know, he's so cute. Okay.
Oh my gosh. Distractions.
But I know. But they create a lot of the privatization I think that has happened has been we want to create competition because that drives down the cost of things and blah, blah, blah. But I just don't, how can you have that? How is it a competition when the buyer of your product is literally hand delivered to your door by force?
Right.
Depending upon your jurisdiction. It's not like somebody gets sentenced to prison time and then they go to their favorite prison because they're doing the best job.
Exactly. You don't get to pick and choose. You just get sent somewhere. But yeah, I get that lens. But when you actually give that to people who are in the position to own these private prisons, they have money and they have power. And the amount of stories that I don't even know a lot, but I've heard of a couple. Isn't there certain corrupt judges setting people to certain things or sentencing certain ways to get them into these private prisons?
Yeah, I think there was something recently where a judge sentenced somebody to a specific rehab program, but he had a vested financial interest in it.
Right.
All of that stuff gets real gross. And I say all of this to say I agreed with the people that were talking about this on that episode, that private prisons are gross. I also think it's interesting that the federal government doesn't allow private prisons in the federal system. And it makes me annoyed that they still exist within the states.
Yeah, that doesn't make any sense.
I know. They didn't outlaw it as the practice, but they stopped using, or they didn't allow it
federally.
On federal side, which is interesting. Okay, moving on.
What does
So
that say?
basically, I know, it's just gross. Anyway, okay. I'm talking about you, Geo Group. Okay, so recently I was listening to this podcast, and basically it's the terminology and the language that gets thrown around, and then you say things that sound good, and but are they really in practice? So the starting example is people often say we should only be focusing on incarcerating people who commit violent crimes,
Okay.
right? Like, doesn't that sound good?
Yeah, it's a statement that is like no one would be like, I object
Right.
right away. Yeah.
So that was sort of like the starting premise of we have too many people
Okay.
who are incarcerated. We should just be focusing on violent crime. Then they looked up federal crime statistics, and according to the robots, 7% of federal inmates are charged with violent crime versus
Yeah.
93% who are charged with nonviolent crime,
Totally.
which sounds appalling.
But I can see that if it's true.
Yeah, which I believe it is. And anecdotally, in my experience, actually, I saw less violent crime prosecuted than that. Anyway, so that was kind of the premise that they were starting from, which is then when I wanted to yell at the screen and add some additional information because, yes, that sounds like it's appalling. And it sounds like it's a bad thing. However, there's several reasons for that on the federal system that I don't think people realize. Number one, I think a lot of it has to do with federal jurisdiction. And before I jump into this, I think also it's worth noting that the definition of violent crime by federal statute is going to be an offense that has an element with the use of force, threatened use of force, attempted use of physical force against a person or property of another person, which is interesting that the property crimes get lumped in.
Yeah.
Anyway, but the thing that makes it difficult with federal crime is that federal jurisdiction doesn't usually encompass a crime that's violent because federal crimes have, what is it? I listed off because I asked the robots because I didn't want to miss. Basically, there's like 7 categories generally of federal jurisdiction. The first is the big daddy, which is interstate commerce. So that is a can of worms, which also has many cans of worms and soapboxes we could talk about. However, basically anything that's traded in interstate commerce between states becomes federal because which state would get jurisdiction?
Yeah.
Or it
Okay.
can be federal. Like they can
I was
elect
gonna
to pick
say,
up.
like, how do you constitute a state and federal crime? But this is making sense, and which is why I feel like it's leading to explain why that first statement
Yes.
was so off.
So like a big one you would see would be like a firearm, possession of a firearm by a convicted felon. They're
Yeah.
able to charge that federally if they want to because firearms are made and traded in interstate commerce because you don't like create and assemble it all within one state.
Okay.
Which it
Makes
kind of feels
sense.
like a stretch, but that's how they use it.
Yeah, that's interesting. What do they
Mhm.
do they parse it down to, like, what if it was a gun that was happened to be made and manufactured in one state? Like, is that such a thing? Would they remove
There
that?
aren't any.
None?
I guess unless no, because there's like the parts and the
Mm.
pieces, like no
I was
matter
thinking of
what, there's going to
staccato,
be
but you're right.
movement.
There's things they have to probably ship in. Okay, continue.
And then they're like shipped nationwide to different
Oh, yeah.
stores, all of that. And then so this clause also then will hold or like encapsulate digital crime. So if you have people put just stuff on the internet and internet fraud and all of those kinds of things that are obviously not contained within one state's jurisdiction. Next, you have crimes that are committed on federal property. So that would be national parks, military bases by civilians, because if you're active in the military, then the military prosecutes you.
Makes sense.
Crimes against federal officers or employees, so prison guards in the federal system, federal law enforcement, those people.
Okay.
Federal program or benefits crimes. So I think a lot of this ends up being fraud.
Yeah.
Medicare fraud, like USDA grants. There was a whole thing here when the BP oil spill happened. A bunch of people claimed whatever. I can't remember what the program was. FEMA. It was through FEMA. They requested
Wow.
FEMA funds. A lot of people made up businesses and losses. So now that's a federal crime because
That's
you defrauded a
crazy.
federal agency.
Is tax evasion in there? Because that was the first thing I thought of. Okay.
Yeah.
Like that's within that
all the
bucket.
IRS shit.
Okay.
Maritime jurisdiction. This is a weird one. And I saw one of these one time, but that's like high seas or international waters. So basically US ships that are in international waters.
Oh, interesting.
So like if a crime of some type happens on that vessel, then it becomes federal jurisdiction. Also, apparently space stations are considered maritime jurisdiction. If you like
What
punch someone
crimes
in
are
the throat
happening?
while you're
Yeah,
at the
right.
space station.
That's
I don't know.
crazy. Okay.
I was also wondering if this counts Antarctica, because remember my obsession with them having people in Antarctica?
There's something
Okay,
weird going on
anyway.
there.
I know. I don't. Okay. Side tangent. And then special U.S. interests like counterfeiting U.S. currency.
Makes sense.
That makes sense. And then there's also some weird stuff about if you harm a U.S. citizen abroad, but I don't even know how they would prosecute that.
Interesting.
Yeah, I don't
Like,
know.
okay, whatever.
I've never seen that, but
Like a U.S. citizen overseas attacks another U.S. citizen over somewhere else?
yeah, I don't know actually. I don't know if it's a foreign person or if it's two U.S. citizens. I don't know. Anyway, that's jurisdiction. So if you look at that, it makes sense that not a lot of these things are going to lend themselves to something that is considered a violent crime.
Were the podcasters
When,
specifically talking about federal?
yes.
Okay, then this, yeah, okay.
Because a lot, I think, I didn't look up, and you'd have to look up state by state, but states are going to have more violent crime because your one-on-one
Right.
individuals brawling or hurting each other are going to happen not within interstate commerce and
Yeah.
not something that the feds are going to be able to pick up. I will say, as a side tangent, we would have people commit violent crime possessing a firearm, and because witnesses and victims don't always want to cooperate because of it being a danger to themselves or other reasons, we would see the federal government pick up like the charge for possessing a firearm. So they couldn't charge them for any of the violent stuff that they did, but they could pull the charge for the firearm and then take federal jurisdiction. So even though that would be considered a nonviolent crime, the circumstances surrounding the charge were quite violent, or the
Okay.
individual was extremely violent, which is what we
Yeah.
typically saw. Like
Yeah.
our U.S. Attorney's Office wouldn't pick those up unless the person was a literal menace to society.
That
So I
makes
have like
sense.
a perfect example of a guy who was extremely violent, extremely to women, pregnant women, very, very violent. But he was charged with possession of a firearm by a convicted felon, and that gets tagged as a nonviolent charge in statistics.
Okay.
But should that person probably have been removed from society for a period of time? Yeah.
Interesting. Dang. The labeling system is okay. Okay.
So the other thing, like really the only time that you'll see an actual like traditional violent crime is when it happens on federal property, and there's not that much federal property. So I did one time I did see a case that came in that was a literal homicide on a national park. And we never had homicide cases. So that was like a big deal.
Interesting.
But that, again, that doesn't happen super often.
Mhm.
And then I've seen in my career, I saw one maritime jurisdiction where a guy got a little stabby while he was at sea.
Just a little stabby.
Yeah, I got a little stabby while he was at sea. That was interesting because we never saw that. And then also there are some like different stipulations for Native American reservations.
Mhm.
Because my understanding is tribal law handles what would be a misdemeanor, and then the federal government prosecutes the felonies that happen on tribal lands.
Okay.
Also, any crimes that happen within the District of Columbia are all federal. So you'll see violent crime that happens there, and then that would be charged that way. But it's only within like the
Oh, I
actual
didn't think
DC
about that.
limits.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah, they have some weird, wild things.
Yeah, there's so much other things that you could do criminally that's not violent that would be in federal. So it makes no sense to just, back to the sentence, that question. Yeah.
So then my thing came into, I guess what I wish that I could tell people is to understand that it sounds good to be focusing on violent crime. However, I think the better way to talk about these things would be victim or victimless crime, because I would argue that all violent crime has a victim, but there are a lot of quote unquote non-violent crimes that also have very real victims.
Yeah.
That deserve to have justice in their cases. Also, just as a side tangent, the whole like nonviolent drug offense term gets thrown around a lot, which I think is another hard can of worms to unpack. And I do agree we have way too many people incarcerated just straight up for drug offenses. But I think it also gets hard when you look, again, all of it goes back to like, you can't look at the charge. Like, you would have to go in and look at the arrest reports of the surrounding circumstances.
Yeah.
Because there's going to be folks who, again, were engaged in something extremely violent. That's why the feds started investigating them for drugs. And then they only could charge them for the drug offense. And the state is never going to charge, hardly ever, like, while the feds are charging. The state will just be like, we'll drop it. We don't care.
Yeah.
Like,
Like if
y'all
you get
take
pulled
them.
over with something and you get incarcerated, okay, not good. But if you're a part of an organization where crime is being, like violent crimes being committed in the context of the drug organization, whatever that they're a part of, like, then yeah, that's hard to decipher. So that would be that's where it gets tricky, I can see.
Yeah. And there were
Interesting.
times that I also can definitely tell you I saw bullshit. Like, they wanted to charge something as a drug conspiracy, and you have all these people working together, but half of the people in this so-called conspiracy are just meth heads in a trailer park, but selling some meth so they can have some meth. Like,
Yeah.
do they need to be federally charged for that and go to prison for this huge number of years and be held accountable with a conspiracy of 20 other people and all be
crazy.
jointly responsible for the joint drug weight? Absolutely inappropriate. Do not agree with it at all. However, like you said, everyone likes to yip yap about marijuana, but one of the most like violent strings of gun violence we had in our area was related to a group of individuals who were selling marijuana and trying to rip off another group that were selling marijuana, and they were trying to rob each other. So that like started the whole drug investigation. Again, if marijuana were legal, would we be doing this? No, and that's a different thing. But it just
There's
say
so
that
much
to
more
say
context. Yes. There's a
so
lot of
much
gray
more.
area. Like you'd have to look into every situation, not just the what's stamped on the top of the file folder, whatever that looks like for you guys. Yeah.
Because there's just so much nuance. I think, and that's also my obsession with things in life in general, that you just, like, the surface level of things will sound great, but there's always more to the story. And so getting back to my new soapbox of we need to look at victim crime, like crimes with victims versus victimless. I made a list of crimes that are considered nonviolent. So they sound much less threatening. However, again, like there's like further nuance.
Yeah.
So we talked about the possession of a firearm by a convicted felon because, again, that's considered nonviolent. But not always, but often when you look at the circumstances surrounding the person that's possessing the firearm and what they were doing the time that the crime took place that led them to be arrested, it's often violent. So could this be abused? Absolutely. Like this charge. But the people, at least where I worked, I felt like were very ethical in the way that they did that. And they only picked up those cases where you had people who were causing a lot of harm. Next, we did talk about possession with intent to distribute a controlled substance, because some people say that this doesn't have a victim. Other people are going to argue that the victims are the people who are using the drugs. I don't really have an opinion.
That one's hard.
Because I feel like people are choosing to purchase, but I don't know how much choice they have when they're in the throes of addiction. I don't know. Do you have thoughts on that? I've never been able to make heads or tails of my feelings.
So the question is, do people who are buying, say it again?
Yeah, like, are the purchasers of drugs victims?
I would say they're a victim of mental fortitude, but I don't think they would be like a victim in the so-called law and order world. Like they need help, but it's not like, right? Like they need help, but it wouldn't be like labeled a victim. That's kind of my stance at this point.
I feel like it's hard to say that the drug dealer is the perpetrator.
Right. It's not like he's forcing, or him or her is forcing, like, take these. It's like I have these and they're coming to because they want it because they're addicted. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, people go both ways on that. And like I said, I kind of feel back and forth. Next, we've obviously talked about this with like fraud and healthcare fraud, wire fraud, bank fraud. I'll be honest, I don't really give a shit. In most cases, like you defrauded Medicare. I don't, okay, I feel like Medicare is defrauding me. However, I think it's important to note that a lot of fraud cases have extremely real victims. Like, your embezzlement cases where somebody says they're going to invest your money and they invest it into themselves doing extravagant trips. We had somebody who said he was selling homeowners insurance to people on the beach and giving them a great deal because that's obviously something expensive. Really, he was putting all of the money in his own bank account and spending it at will. And then we had a hurricane and they went to go file a claim and there was no company. And so all of them were out just completely out of pocket for all of their losses. And then the real kicker is when they went to try to go get legitimate insurance, their premiums were through the roof because it was showing that they had been uninsured for a large number of years.
That's awful.
And
that is
that's the
victim.
case where I'm like, those are victims, and that person
Yes.
deserves to do some serious time.
100%.
Because no, it wasn't violent, but he ruined people's lives.
Upheaval their whole lives. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the fraud. I think that's like one of the really big ones for me where I'm like, you can't just make it, you can't just say violent, not violent, because there's really real victims in the fraud world. And that's a lot of federal crime.
That's crazy.
Another good example, we had a guy that made a fake app. He said he made an app and he was looking for investors and there was no app. So they charged him with fraud. Unrelated, he went on to commit homicide of his mother of his child.
My.
Anyway,
oh God, that's
crazy. A side note, but you just also like never know what's going on with people.
Exactly.
But okay, last but not least, these are my whammies. These are also considered nonviolent, which would be number 1, possession of exploitative material of a child, considered nonviolent. Considered nonviolent.
Obviously, victims there.
Jeez. They're not hands-on committing a violent crime by the definition of the statutes. Enticement of a minor also considered nonviolent because it's talking
not the act
over the internet, as is traveling in interstate commerce for purposes of meeting with a minor to engage in illicit activity, also considered nonviolent, which are also a huge number of federal crimes. And that is my conclusion. But basically, you have to understand the definitions of things when you start talking about stuff, and it's hard to have opinions. I would have had the same opinions as the people talking on this podcast had I not worked in the field and had an in-depth knowledge of what they were saying, and there's still plenty of stuff that I don't know. But my fun fact of the day is, in conclusion, I think most people would be surprised to know that about the child crimes, and they don't really realize that a lot of that is prosecuted by the FBI, but also a lot by the Department of Homeland Security because they deal with a lot of the cyber crime. Oh, I forgot to mention immigration crimes, but I don't want to even touch that with a 90-foot pole. But I just think it's important to know these things so that when you have discussions with people, especially if you're talking about federal crimes, to understand that when there's victims, those victims deserve justice. Should we be doing a better job of when we're housing people in custody and having program, all of that? Yes, they're still humans, all of those things.
Yeah.
But I just really wish I could have inserted myself and just explained violent versus nonviolent and victim versus victimless, because I think that makes a bigger difference. And when the government is the victim, shut the fuck up.
Yeah, I agree. Unless it's like, I can only see that if it's like coming out of our tax dollars. But then again, we're all victims there. So it's like, it comes back.
Yeah, I know. I'm like, okay, you guys can start like charging these things. Yes. I'll take you seriously if you stop flushing my tax dollars down the toilet.
Me every year. Anyway, no, I agree. It's very interesting.
Do you have any reflections and final thoughts?
It's like, I think this comes with everything. There's also a hot topic that we don't need to get into today, but I feel like there's also layers of understanding. And I'm talking about guns and gun rights and gun laws and stuff like that, where there's like the top layer where if you say something, it makes sense. It's clickbait. It's like, oh yeah, non-arguable. You should stand behind this. But then you really go into the definitions and you understand what that actually means and the consequences of labeling certain things a certain way. Then you're like, oh crap, there's a whole other layer here. And then within those layers, there's probably like 5 other offshoot layers of each little side tangent, which also, again, is kind of reflective of what when you were talking, I was kind of thinking of a subtopic of levels of understanding. And so it's hard to like just hear that one sentence and expect people to like either agree or disagree when it's like, it's a multiple conversation, months in time of like talking and understanding before you can like have a serious debate if you're trying to make changes, because like there's so much to it. I think that's with a lot of things, especially within the government stuff. So I'm tracking and I agree.
Yeah. It was just, I don't know, for me, it was kind of a cool example to reflect on. If somebody were to say to me, we should incarcerate more people that commit violent crimes, I would say yes. And then also, as just a layperson, we shouldn't have as many people in prison who've committed nonviolent crimes. My initial reaction to that would be to say yes. Yeah. However, like we just talked about, none of the stuff comes out if people don't have conversations. So I think, like to your point, I'm happy that people can have discussions, but we have to let people have those discussions, and then we have to be calm enough to listen to people as they unpack the different things that are the nuance of whatever topic you're talking about, and let that happen, because I think over time it plays out, and then you get more information, and then you can have a more correct way of articulating what's going on in a situation to better identify what the actual problem is. And until you know what the problem is, you can't really have a good solution.
Yeah. 100%.
Amen.
I love it. Preach, sister.
Thank you. I needed somewhere that Jason already had to listen to me rant about this the day of. So thank you for letting me rant about it further, because I want the world to know.
Yes, please. And if you guys have comments or thoughts, let us know.
Let me know. Okay.
All right. Here's the 2026. And to
Happy
better
New
understanding,
Year!
Happy New Year.
I love you. Bye.
Love you. Bye.